All right, when you hear the words legal brief, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I bet it's a mountain of really dry, super dense, and, let's be honest, kind of boring paper. But what if I told you it's actually one of the most powerful persuasion machines ever invented? Seriously. Okay, let's dive into this and see exactly how it works. I mean, check this out. Our source material doesn't pull any punches. It calls a brief a discursive weapon. Think about that. A strategic tool, a piece of powerful reasoning that's being wielded in the high-stakes theater of a courtroom. This is not just a document. It's an engine built for one single purpose: to change a mind. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to build this machine right from the ground up. We'll start with the big idea. Then we'll lay the factual foundation, install the legal framework, fire up the argumentative engine, and finally, watch how it actually turns text into law. First up, the ultimate persuasion machine. The whole idea here is to stop seeing a brief as just some passive document and start seeing it for what it really is: an active cognitive engine. It's designed to guide a judge's thinking from point A all the way to a very specific, predetermined point B. So here's the more formal definition: a structured act of persuasion. Just notice how every single part of that has a job. You've got your raw materials, those are the facts. You've got the frame, that's logic. And you've got the justification, precedent, what other courts have already decided. When you put all that together, it is an incredibly powerful formula. All right, let's get to our machine's foundation. Every great argument, whether it's in a courtroom or at the dinner table, has to be built on something solid. In law, that solid ground is fact. This is the raw material we're going to use to build everything else. Now, the facts are always presented inside this conflict between two key players. First, you have the plaintiff. That's the one making the claim, taking the initiative. They're the forward-moving, affirmative force. Then you've got the defendant, whose job is to refute that claim. They become the axis the whole argument spins around, and they're protected by that all-important idea, the presumption of innocence. So what keeps this whole conflict grounded in reality? Evidence. I absolutely love this phrase here, a material anchor. That is exactly what evidence does. It stops a legal argument from just floating away into some abstract theory by tying every single claim to something real, something you can actually verify. And all of this gets woven together in what's called the statement of fact. Now, this is not just a boring list of what happened. No way. It's the careful construction of a defined reality for the court. The lawyer is meticulously selecting and presenting facts to create the very landscape their argument is going to be built on. Okay, foundation is in place. Now we need to install the next layer, the legal framework. A great way to think about this is like the operating system for our persuasion machine. Facts are just raw data, right? It's the law that gives them structure and meaning. The first part of this OS is the applicable law. This is the official rulebook, the statutes, the regulations that govern the whole situation. The source calls it a gravitational pull, which is perfect. It keeps the argument from flying off into left field, forcing it to align with established written-down authority. Next up is case law. Our source calls this the doctrinal memory of the legal system. Isn't that great? This is where lawyers look back at past court decisions, at precedent, to show that their line of reasoning is consistent with how the law has been interpreted before. It gives the whole argument a sense of historical weight and authority. Now for a really crucial, but often kind of tricky concept, the standard of review. This is absolutely critical for appeals. See, a higher court doesn't just redo the trial. Instead, this evaluative lens sets the rules for how they're allowed to look at the lower court's decision. It dictates how much respect or deference they have to give to that original ruling. And this breaks that lens down perfectly. There's a whole hierarchy here. First, for issues of fact, the appeals court gives a ton of deference. They basically trust the original court's findings. But for issues of law, like was the right legal rule even used, it's a totally different story. Zero deference. They look at it completely fresh. And finally, you have this middle ground, issues of discretion. Here, they just ask if the judge's decision was reasonable, not whether they would have made the exact same call. This hierarchy is absolutely fundamental to how the appeals process works. So we've got our foundation of facts, we've got our framework of law. Now it is time to fire up the engine. This is the part where we combine everything to generate real persuasive force.
The engine always starts by identifying the legal issue. This is the central pivot for the entire brief. It frames the whole debate by asking two simple but incredibly powerful questions. What's the correct law for the situation, and how exactly does it apply to our specific set of facts?
From there, it gets refined into the question presented. And let me tell you, this is a true art form. A great lawyer can take a massive, complicated case and boil it all down to one sharp, focused question that subtly starts guiding the judge toward their side of the argument.
And that question gets its answer in the argument. I just love this metaphor from the source. It calls the argument the vertebral column. It's the backbone. It provides the structure that holds absolutely everything together, weaving those raw facts and that legal framework into one single powerful, coherent story.
Okay, our machine is fully built. It's this beautiful piece of logical engineering. But now what, right? What does it do? In our final section, we're going to look at the result, how this machine actually plugs into the legal system to create real change. Well, the first way is through something called a motion. A brief usually exists to support a motion, which is really just a formal request for the court to do something. Dismiss the case, throw out some evidence, whatever it is. This is where all that persuasive energy in the brief gets turned into concrete procedural action. And then, of course, you have the hearing. This is where the static words on the page suddenly come alive. It's a performance. The arguments are spoken out loud, they're challenged, they're defended, all in real time. It's where the carefully constructed machine finally gets put to the ultimate test.
Which naturally brings us to the ultimate question. After all this meticulous work, gathering the facts, applying the law, crafting the argument, how do we actually know if we succeeded? Because it's not always as simple as just winning or losing.
The true measure of success is what our source calls yield. This is the real outcome, the shift in understanding. You have to ask, did the brief just get read, or did it fundamentally change the judge's perception of the case? See, the goal isn't just to be heard, it's to transform belief. That is the ultimate success of this persuasion machine. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We've just spent all this time dissecting a legal brief, but this basic structure, grounding your claims in facts, framing them with established rules, and building a coherent argument, that's a powerful tool for any kind of persuasion. So just imagine, what if we built all of our important arguments with this much rigor and clarity? What might change?